She walked out on the Billionaire. 7 months later, he got the call. His black ex was in labor with his twins. The rain hadn't started yet, but Detroit knew it was coming. You could feel it in the way the air pressed against windows 40 floors up, how the city lights flickered like they were holding their breath. Troy Keaton sat in his penthouse office, signing documents in the kind of silence that costs extra. Soundproof glass, climate control that never whispers, carpet thick enough to bury secrets in. His therapist had written something last week. Your silence isn't peace, it's a waiting room. She was right. He'd been waiting 9 months. The phone lit up at 2:17 a.m. Not his business line, the personal one. The number showed as unknown, but unknown numbers at this hour weren't random. They were specific. They were purposeful. Troy answered on the second ring, already standing before he knew why. Troy. The voice cut through 9 months of practiced forgetting. Jade Collins didn't need to say her name. Some voices carry their own signature, especially when they've once held your whole future in their throat. I'm at Memorial Hospital in Savannah. Each word came measured, like she was rationing breath. I'm in labor. They're twins. A pause that held everything. They're yours. The line stayed open. No questions, no denial, no calculation of dates or possibilities. Troy grabbed his keys from the marble counter, his reflection in the black. Granite showing a man already in motion before his mind caught up. The elevator descended while rain finally broke against the building, each drop a small percussion against the inevitable. Sometimes he would tell someone later, urgency is the first honest prayer. At 2:17 a.m., a billionaire heard 4 words that could rewrite his life. I'm in labor. Twins. Not a merger. Not a crisis in Tokyo or London. Just biology refusing to wait for business hours, for prepared statements, for the right timing that never comes. Have you ever had a call that knew your whole name? Not the one on your business card or driver's license, but the name, written in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. Ever loved someone you lost because one mistake told the truth? About your priorities when you thought you were just being practical. He'd let optics talk for him 9 months ago. Let the board's concerns and his mother's social calculations speak louder than what his hands knew when they held her. She'd walked before the room shrank her, before his world became too small for someone who dreamed in horizons. Now, her boundary, calling only when medical forms demanded a father's name, was saving them both from the conversation they'd never figured out how to have. Can a man change quickly enough to be trusted when it matters? Can 9 months of therapy and withdrawn merger proposals add up to 5 minutes of right choices? Stay with me, because this story isn't about redemption. It's about what happens when life stops letting you practice. Mr. Steele, Rich Stories family, thank you for getting us past 600 strong. Your comments on the last story about second chances and broken trust tell me you understand what we're building here. If you're feeling this already, tap like, hit subscribe, and drop twins in the comments. So I know you're day ones who've been waiting for this one. Now, let's rewind. Because to understand why Troy Keaton is now boarding a private flight to Savannah at 2:47 a.m. and why Jade Collins broke her own rule about never calling first, we need to go back to a Thursday in October, 9 months earlier. Back to when they were different people with the same names, when his company's value was half what it is now, when her art studio was just blueprints and determination, back to when they thought love was about holding on, before they learned it was, about knowing when to let go, and, more importantly, when to answer the phone. The rain fell harder as Troy's car pulled onto the tarmac where his pilot waited. In the vehicle, he didn't check emails or make calls. He just sat with his hands open, practicing holding something he hadn't met yet. 2 things. 2 someones who would carry forward whatever he and Jade decided in the next few hours. His phone buzzed with a text from her. Room 847. They're coming fast. Troy told the pilot to file the flight plan immediately. Some moments don't wait for permission. Some arrivals rewrite every departure that came before them. And sometimes, at 2:17 a.m., love calls collect from a hospital room, asking not for apologies or promises, but just presence. Just the simple act of showing up when showing up is all that's left. The flight to Savannah took 93 minutes. 93 minutes of watching clouds and city lights blur past, of wondering if he'd arrive in time, of understanding that in time wasn't about witnessing birth but about being present for what came after. His reflection in the plane window showed him something new, not a CEO, not an ex, not a man with regrets or rehearsed words. Just a father, arriving, 9 months before the phone call, before twins and labor rooms and midnight flights. To Savannah, Troy Keaton stopped walking because of chalk dust in the October wind. The mural covered the entire side of Jefferson Community Center, a constellation of handprints in every color that existed and some that shouldn't. Kids from the neighborhood had written their names in chalk along the bottom, temporary signatures under permanent paint. Jade Collins stood on a ladder, adding golden edges to the highest reaches, her brush steady despite the Detroit breeze that kept threatening to turn autumn into winter. Paint dripped once, caught the wind, landed on his Italian wool sleeve. Troy looked at the mark, gold against navy, and didn't move to wipe it away. "The ladder's fighting you," he said, watching it shift with each gust. She didn't look down. "It's fine. I've done this before. You don't have to." He was already moving toward the base, hands finding the aluminum rails. "I want to." The words came out before calculation, before the part of his brain that turned everything into negotiation could wake up. His hands held the ladder steady. Above him, Jade's brush moved with new confidence, adding light to places that had been waiting for it. When she climbed down an hour later, there were gold flecks in her hair and satisfaction in the set of her shoulders. She looked at him. This man in a $1,000 suit holding a paint-stained ladder, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Your sleeve is ruined. It's improved." He meant it. The mark would stay on that jacket through 3 dry cleanings before he finally let them treat it properly. Even then, if you knew where to look, you could see where the gold had been. They walked 6 blocks before either spoke again. She led him to a taco truck where the owner knew her name, knew to add extra lime. Without asking, knew she'd paint his daughter's quinceañera banner next month. Troy ate standing up, salsa verde dripping onto Italian leather shoes, learning that some meals were about more than sustenance. They were about belonging somewhere specific. "Your lines," she said suddenly, looking back at the mural visible 2 blocks away. "They don't know how to breathe." He followed her gaze. "What do you mean?" "In your buildings. I've seen the Keaton developments downtown. Every line is perfect, controlled, no room for accident or adjustment." She turned to him. "It's not the breath they need. It's listening." "Listening to what?" "To what wants to happen next. Not what you planned, but what the space is asking for." Troy had built an empire on 5-year projections and controlled outcomes. But standing there, taco in hand, watching this woman see through steel and glass to something he'd never named, he wondered if he'd been speaking the wrong language all along. The rhythm found them without announcement. Tuesday, sunrise walks before the city woke up. Thursday dinners in her studio, paint fumes and Thai food mixing into something that felt like home. Saturday mornings at construction sites where he'd show her blueprints and she'd show him where joy could live in the corners. She kissed him first, 3 weeks in, her hands leaving paint prints on his jaw that he kept until the next morning's board meeting. "This is oxygen," she said against his mouth, and he understood. Not the desperate gasp of drowning, but the steady breath of finally surfacing. His story came out in pieces. The treehouse he'd built at 7, crooked and unsupervised, that his father tore down for liability reasons. The scholarship to MIT he'd turned down for Harvard because the family expected crimson, not cardinal. The way he'd learned to build buildings that couldn't be torn down, that were too perfect to criticize, too profitable to question. "You chose safety," she said, not unkindly. "I chose survival. Same thing, different flaw." Her story was a deliberate revelation. The community center wasn't just a canvas. It was where she'd learned to read, where her mother had taken citizenship classes, where her brother got clean and stayed that way. She had offers from galleries in New York, Los Angeles, places where art turned into commodities. She chose Detroit. She chose to stay. That's brave, he said. That's belonging. Brave is thinking you can improve something by leaving it. They were lying on her studio floor, looking up at a ceiling she'd covered in glow-in-the-dark stars, not in constellation patterns, but in the shape of the neighborhood, each star a house where someone she knew lived. What happens when belonging and becoming want different things? He asked. Then you learn which one you can live without. Neither of them knew they were writing prophecies. The foundation fought the feelings from the start. His mother, Eleanor Keaton, visits the studio with a checkbook, offering to sponsor Jade's work properly. The board members who wondered why Troy's signatures came later smelled like acrylic and possibility. The charity galas where Jade wore the same dress twice, on purpose, because clothes shouldn't be costumes. But in the quiet spaces, her teaching him to see negative space, him teaching her spreadsheets could be love letters. If you knew how to read them, they built something that didn't need anyone else's blueprint. Every love meets a test, Jade said one night, painting in the dark just to see what would happen. The lucky ones get tested early while they still remember why they started. Troy was watching her work, seeing how she trusted her hands more than her eyes. What kind of test? The kind that asks if you love the person or the idea of them, if you're building something together or just adjacent. The brush moved in circles that became wings, though neither of them could see it yet. The kind where you find out if your foundation can hold feelings, or if your feelings can survive the foundation. He pulled her against him, paint wet between them, marking both equally. We're different. Everyone thinks that. The test doesn't care what you think. She was right. She usually was. 6 months later, the test would arrive in the form of a merger proposal with Stellan Industries, a deal that required Troy to relocate to Singapore for 2 years, to present himself as unattached, focused, free from local obligations. But that night, in her studio with paint drying in patterns they'd discover in the morning, they were still writing their beginning, still believing that love could be both foundation and feeling, both safety and flight, both staying and becoming. Gold in the air can be a trap if you forget who you walked in with, if you let the shimmer blind you to the hands that helped you paint it there. Troy would learn this. Jade already knew it. The mural at Jefferson Community Center would outlast their relationship by months, and would still be there when Troy drove past it on his way to the airport 9 months later, following the gold edges she'd painted like a map back to what mattered. The kids' chalk names would wash away and return, temporarily made eternal through repetition. But that October night, with the ladder steady and the paint fresh, with her concentration complete and his hands helpful, they were exactly where they needed to be, building something worth the breaking it would take to make them whole. The Windsor Ballroom held 500 people comfortably, but that night it felt like a shoebox with gilt edges. The Keaton Industries annual gala, where deals were blessed and futures, decided over champagne that cost more than most made in a week. They arrived in separate cars. His idea. It's just simpler, Troy had said that afternoon, adjusting his cufflinks in her studio mirror. Different sides of town, different timing. I need to be there early for the board. Jade had nodded, applying lipstick she'd bought specifically for this night, a shade, called Confidence, that would end up on a champagne glass she'd never finish. She understood logistics. What she didn't understand yet was the difference between practical and practiced, between efficiency and erasure. She entered through the main doors at 8:15, exactly when he'd suggested. The dress was new, a deep emerald that moved like water when she walked. She'd bought it with her own money, from her own sales, because she needed to walk in belonging to herself. Troy stood near the bar, surrounded by board members whose names she'd memorized from stories he'd told in the dark. Richard Stellan was there, the merger, Singapore, the future that required Troy to appear unattached. She watched her man's shoulders tighten when he saw her, watched something flicker across his face. Not quite panic, not quite pride, but something suspended between them. She moved toward him, natural, confidence, the woman who'd taught him that buildings could breathe. Richard Stellan whispered something, just 4 words, but they carried across the marble floor like a verdict. Is that the artist? Not, is that Jade? Not, is that your girlfriend? The artist, like a category. like a problem to be managed. Troy intercepted her halfway across the floor. His hand on her elbow was gentle but directional, steering her toward an alcove, where portrait paintings of former board presidents watched with oil paint eyes. "Could you wait in the lounge for a bit?" His voice was low, careful. The Singapore people just arrived, and the optics are sensitive right now. Jade stood completely still, not frozen, deliberate. The kind of stillness that comes before clarity. "The optics," she repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. "The merger requires certain presentations. They need to see stability, focus. Having," he gestured, then pushed through, "having someone they don't expect raises questions we're not ready to answer. Someone they don't expect." Each word came out clean, separate, like she was teaching him a new language. "You mean someone who doesn't fit your corporate image? Someone who does what I do? Someone who doesn't translate into your spreadsheet? That's not what I... Am I surprised you're still deciding how to present?" Her voice didn't rise. "Dignity doesn't need volume. Or am I something you're hoping becomes presentable with enough time?" Troy's fear spoke before his love could. "They want consistency. They want to know I'm committed to the expansion, that nothing local will compromise the global vision. Nothing local." She smiled then, sad and complete. "I'm local now. I'm a compromise. Jade, please, just an hour. Let me handle the initial..." "No." The word was soft, final. "I won't be less to make anyone comfortable, not even you. Especially not you." She kissed his cheek, a goodbye disguised as a greeting. Her lipstick left a mark, confidence, that he'd discover later in a bathroom mirror, the only evidence she'd been there at all. Her clutch remained on the side table where she'd set it, a green silk surrender he'd find after. Everyone left, after the contracts were discussed, and the future was planned without her in it. The room watched her leave. 500 people, and later none would remember exactly when she'd gone. Only that. Something in the atmosphere shifted, like pressure dropping before weather changes. She walked through those gilt doors with her shoulders square and her head high, teaching everyone present what dignity looked like when it chose itself. The valet brought her car, the Honda she'd painted birds on one summer. Afternoon, wings spreading across the hood in defiance of aerodynamics. She drove home through Detroit, streets that knew her name, past the community center where her mural caught streetlight, and threw it back transformed. In her studio, she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she painted in the dark again, letting her hands remember what her heart was trying to forget. The canvas would show, in the morning, a room getting smaller and smaller, with a door getting larger and larger, until the door was the only thing that made sense. Sometimes, she would tell her sister the next morning, "The bravest thing is to leave before the music tells you to recognize when a room is shrinking you and choose the door while you still remember your original size." Troy found the clutch at midnight, after the Singapore team had shaken hands and promised follow-ups after his mother had praised. His focus and commitment, after Richard Stellan had clapped his shoulder and said, "Good that you're not distracted. These next 2 years will demand everything." Inside the clutch, her keys to his penthouse, the parking pass he'd given, her, a ticket to a jazz concert next Friday they'd planned to attend, and a note written on the back of a paint swatch in her architect's handwriting. "I hope the room fits you better without me in it." He sat in that emptied ballroom, gilt chairs stacked like skeletons, chandelier light showing every scuff mark on the dance floor. His phone showed no missed calls. She hadn't tried to reach him, hadn't waited for him to explain or apologize or choose differently. She'd simply chosen for herself, with the same clarity she brought to blank canvases. The whispers started before the night ended. "Did you see her? Stunning. But..." He handled it well, better now than later. Each comment was another brick in the wall between who Troy had been at the ladder, holding steady, and who he'd become in the ballroom, asking her to wait out of sight. Eleanor Keaton found her son at 1 in the morning, still sitting in that empty ballroom. "The merger will be good for us," she said, not mentioning Jade directly. "Singapore needs someone unencumbered." "Unencumbered," Troy repeated, thinking of paint on his sleeve, gold that wouldn't wash out. She was lovely, his mother continued, a concession that cost her nothing. But love doesn't build empires. What if I don't want an empire? Then you shouldn't have started building one. Foundations don't care what you want. They only care what you maintain. She left him there, in the room that had shrunk the only person who'd ever made him feel larger than his blueprints. The band's equipment sat packed by the door, music silenced, the party over before it really began. What you do in the quiet after tells the truth about who you are. Troy would sit in that ballroom until dawn, replaying the moment when he could have said, "This is Jade, she's with me," instead of "Could you wait?" He'd replay it until the words wore grooves in his memory, until he knew them by heart, but still couldn't change them. 9 months later, racing to the airport at 2:47 a.m., he'd remember this room, this moment, this choice. He'd remember how she'd left with dignity intact, how she'd kissed his cheek like she was blessing him even as she freed herself. He'd remember the clutch, green silk against gold chairs, and how the smallest things sometimes carry the biggest departures. But that would come later, that night, in the ballroom that had witnessed his failure to choose her publicly. Troy. Keaton learned what Jade already knew. Some rooms are too small for love to breathe in. Some stages require performances that cost more than tickets. And sometimes, the only way to love someone is to leave while you still can, before the shrinking becomes permanent, before you forget you were ever meant to be larger than other people's comfort. Savannah held Jade like a grandmother's arms, soft, patient, asking nothing but presence. She'd driven straight through after leaving Detroit, following Highway 75 south like a compass pointing toward grace. The live oaks reached across streets in green arches, Spanish moss hanging, like nature's lace curtains, filtering light into something bearable. She rented a cottage near Forsyth Park, where the fountain threw water toward the sky all day, all night, reliable as breathing. The kitchen faced east. The studio faced north. Both got the kind of light that made creation feel possible again. The positive test came 6 weeks after the gala, 2 blue lines appearing like a door opening to a room she hadn't known existed. Jade sat on her bathroom floor, back against cool tile, holding this plastic prophet that knew her future better than any business plan. "I will build a gentle world for you," she said to the space below her heart where cells were dividing with purpose. "Or you two," she amended, when the ultrasound showed twins, mirror images already practicing being separate together. Aunt Marisol arrived from Atlanta the next day, carrying practicality like a blessing. No questions about the father, no judgment about the leaving. Just a folder of good doctors, a bassinet from her neighbor's grown kids, and the ability to make soup that tasted like safety. "Some gardens grow better without certain shadows," Marisol said, watching Jade paint the nursery. "Walls with clouds that became whales, whales that became waves, waves that became lullabies." "He's not a shadow," Jade replied, adding stars that would glow in the dark, constellations of promise. "He's just someone who loved me in the wrong language." "And you're not teaching translation anymore?" "I'm teaching these two their first language. The rest can wait." The letter to Troy wrote itself one night when the babies moved for the first time. Flutters like whispered questions. "Troy, you deserve to know. I'm carrying twins. They're yours. They're ours, but they'll be mine to raise. This isn't punishment, it's protection. Not from you, but from the machine you're becoming part of. The merger, Singapore, the careful construction of your presentable life. None of that has room for what's messy and real and mine. I'm in Savannah. I'm safe. I'm painting nurseries and teaching at the community center and building a life that fits. Don't look for us. When they're old enough to ask, I'll tell them the truth. Their father was a good man who didn't know how to choose them in a room full of other choices. Be well. Be better. Be free of the weight of us. Jay, she never mailed it. The envelope sat in her drawer next to ultrasound photos and prenatal vitamins. A conversation, with no address, words that needed to exist even if they never traveled. Meanwhile, in Detroit, Troy Keaton was dismantling everything that wasn't essential. Dr. Vega's office overlooked the river, water moving in one direction, while thoughts moved in all. She was 63, had seen enough powerful men to know their patterns, their pauses, their particular way of arranging truth to look like logic. "Tell me about the gala," she said in their third session. Troy had already told it twice. This time, she stopped him at optics. "When you say optics, what fear are you feeding?" He wanted to say competition, market analysis, strategic positioning. Instead, what came out was that I'm not enough without the performance. And was Jade part of the performance or part of the truth? She was the only truth in the room. Then you asked the truth to wait in the lounge while you entertained lies in the ballroom. The work was slow, archaeological, digging through layers of learned behavior, inherited expectations, the calcification of choosing safety. So many times it looked like wisdom. Troy started saying no to galas that required costumes, to meetings that happened over scotch, and subtext to his mother's weekly suggestions about appropriate women from appropriate families. He restructured his giving. Anonymous. Now. No plaques, no photo opportunities, no tax-efficient visibility, just money moving toward need, the way Jade had taught him paint could move toward. Joy, without signature, without credit, just because the wall was asking for color. When Richard Stellan asked about his personal life during merger negotiations, Troy said, "My personal life isn't content for professional consumption. The Singapore team likes to know they're working with stable. I'm stable. I'm also private. If they need my relationship status to evaluate a business merger, they're evaluating the wrong things." The merger proceeded, but Troy didn't go to Singapore. He sent Daniel, his best VP, someone who actually wanted the expat experience, who had a family excited about the adventure. Troy stayed in Detroit, running things remotely when needed, present when necessary. His loneliness was clean, not toxic. He didn't drink it away, or work it away, or purchase substitutes. He sat with it, learned its shape, recognized it as the cost of choosing wrong in a moment, when right had been standing there in an emerald dress, willing to love him past his fear. He drove past the community center once a month, watching the mural age beautifully. Weather adding texture Jade couldn't have planned, but would have loved. Kids still wrote their names in chalk. The edges she'd painted held their color like a promise that some things were built to last. His penthouse got quieter, not empty, purposeful. He removed the things that were for show, kept the things that were for living. The jacket with the paint stain became his North Star, proof that he'd once been someone who held ladders, who stood steady for someone else's reach. The dreams came regularly, not nightmares, just replays with different endings. Sometimes he followed her out. Sometimes he introduced her properly. Sometimes he chose her before she had to choose herself. But morning always came with the same reality. She was gone, had been gone for 8 months now, and his therapist was teaching him that missing someone could be a way of honoring them, not just mourning them. "She gave you a gift," Dr. Vega said one afternoon when Troy mentioned he'd hired an investigator to find Jade, then fired him before he could report back. "She left me. She left with her dignity intact, and yours salvageable. She could have made scenes, could have demanded public choosing, could have waited for you to figure it out while shrinking herself to fit your timeline. Instead, she showed you what self-respect looks like. That's a gift." Troy nodded, understanding finally that love sometimes meant accepting the leaving as much as cherishing the arriving. He began visiting community centers across Detroit, not to donate, with fanfare, but to understand what Jade had seen in those spaces. He sat in on after-school programs, watched kids learn art and music, and coding, saw how adults returned for GED classes and job training. He started to comprehend that these weren't just buildings, they were ecosystems where people grew into themselves without apology. The Keaton Foundation shifted its entire model. Instead of deciding what communities needed, Troy hired advisors from those communities to direct funding. Instead of requiring his name on buildings, he required only accountability reports and impact measurements. Instead of gala photo opportunities, he attended budget meetings and planning sessions where real work happened. His board resisted. His mother threatened to withdraw her shares. Richard Stellan suggested Troy was having some kind of breakdown. But Troy had finally found language that made sense, the language Jade had been speaking. All along, about listening instead of controlling, about serving instead of showcasing. In Savannah, Jade's belly grew round as the moon, fuller. She taught art to kids who reminded her of herself at that age, all possibility, no apology. She painted at night when the babies were active, their movements like rhythm, like they were already dancing to music only they could hear. Marisol stayed through month 7, teaching Jade lullabies that sounded like prayers, showing her how to swaddle using dish towels for practice, making freezer meals labeled with love and heating instructions. "Are you sure about not telling him?" Marisol asked only once, watching Jade fold tiny clothes into dresser drawers. "I'm sure about protecting these two from rooms that would shrink before they learn their full size. If that changes, my choice might change. But not today, and if they ask someday, then I'll tell them their father was learning to be the man they'd need him to be. That some people have to practice being themselves before they can be someone's parent. That timing is everything and nothing all at once." Jade created a life that fit her and the coming babies. She exhibited in local galleries, sold enough to sustain herself, built relationships with other artists and mothers and people who valued substance over status. She walked Forsyth Park every evening, watching the fountain throw water skyward with the same determination. She was cultivating the ability to keep reaching, keep creating, keep flowing despite gravity. The contractions started at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday that had no business being memorable. Early labor, steady but manageable. Jade called Marisol, who arrived within 20 minutes, bag packed, calm radiating from her like a force field. By 2:15 a.m., the contractions were closer, harder, the kind that demanded full attention and removed the luxury of overthinking. Marisol drove while Jade counted breaths in the passenger seat, hands on her belly like she could. Telegraph calm to the two people preparing to enter a world that didn't wait for readiness. At the hospital intake desk, filling out emergency contact information, Jade paused at the line, asking for the father's name and number. The pen hovered. The twins kicked, both of them, like they were voting. She wrote his name, wrote his number, not as an invitation, just as fact. Biology didn't care about ballrooms or boundaries. These babies had a father, and he deserved to know they existed, even if she wasn't sure yet what role he'd play in their becoming. The nurse took the form. "We'll call if there are complications." "Call regardless," Jade heard herself say, "when they arrive." He should know when they arrive. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just the truth, the kind Jade had always honored, even when it complicated her narrative. If you were Jade, would you have mailed that letter? Type mail if you'd send it, hold if you'd wait for proof that change was more than performance. And if this story has you locked in, understanding why boundaries are sometimes the highest form of love, like the video and sharing it with a friend who knows that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's sacred. Drop a heart in the comments if you understand why Jade chose herself and her babies over waiting for Troy to choose them. Labor doesn't knock, it lets itself in. The flight from Detroit to Savannah took 93 minutes, but Troy lived several lifetimes in that confined space above the clouds. His pilot, understanding the urgency without needing details, filed the flight plan in record time and pushed the engines to their limits within safety margins. Troy sat in the leather seat, hands gripping his knees, watching the darkness outside give way to distant city lights, each one representing lives being lived while his was being rewritten. He tried to calculate, when had she gotten pregnant? The timeline wound backward to the gala, to those last weeks when they'd still been together, still been creating futures neither would inhabit the way they'd planned. The math worked. The truth settled. 2 babies coming now existed because of love that had once been real, even if the foundation couldn't hold it. His phone buzzed with updates from Jade, 4 centimeters dilated, then, 20 minutes later, 6 centimeters, moving fast. He texted the pilot, "Can we go faster?" The response came immediately, Already at maximum, sir. ETA, 42 minutes. Troy closed his eyes, not praying exactly, but asking the universe for something he hadn't asked for in years. Not control, just presence. Let him arrive in time. Let him be there when they enter the world. Let him not miss the beginning the way he'd ruined the middle. The plane touched down at 4:18 a.m. A car waited on the tarmac, driver already briefed, engine running. Troy threw himself into the back seat, gave the address for Memorial Hospital, and watched Savannah pass in pre-dawn shadows. Live oaks and historic homes and a fountain in a park that threw water skyward even at this hour. He arrived at 4:29 a.m., took the stairs because elevators, felt too slow, and found the maternity ward on the 3rd floor, room 847. The number on Jade's text, now on a door, behind which his entire future was being born. He stood in the doorway, not entering, palms open at his sides like he was showing he carried no weapons, no agenda, just presence. Jade was in active labor, Marisol supporting her from one side, a midwife named Nadia Ray coaching from the other. A nurse, Kiana Holt, monitored machines that tracked 2 heartbeats, 2 separate journeys toward the same destination. "Tell me how to help," Troy said quietly. Jade, between contractions, looked at this man who'd once asked her to wait in a lounge. Now he was asking permission to enter her pain, to be useful in her process. "Be quiet," she said, voice strained but clear. "Be warm. Be here." He nodded, entered, took the position Marisol indicated, behind Jade, providing counter-pressure during contractions. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't check his phone, didn't ask questions that centered his confusion, just offered his hands, his heat, his steady presence while her body did work he could only witness. Midwife Nadia Ray moved through the room like water finding its level, everywhere needed, nowhere intrusive. She'd delivered 300 babies, but each one still received her full attention. Her complete belief that birth was sacred work deserving reverence. "Twins usually come faster after the first arrives," Nadia explained during a calm moment. "Your body knows the way now. Muscle memory from minutes ago." Jade nodded, breathing through another wave. Troy counted out loud, 1 through 8, the rhythm Nadia had taught him, giving Jade something external to focus on, while internal forces reorganized her universe. Marisol whispered encouragement, old words her grandmother had spoken, a lineage of women speaking strength across generations. Kiana monitored vitals, adjusted lights, brought ice chips and warm blankets, her efficiency a form of care. At 4:51 a.m., Nova arrived. Small, furious, already demanding the world rearrange itself around her needs. Dark hair plastered to a perfectly round head, fists the size of walnuts. A voice that filled the room with objection to the cold, the light, the sudden separation from the only home she'd known. Nadia placed her on Jade's chest, skin to skin, and Nova quieted immediately, not silent, but purposeful in her sounds, like she was narrating her first moments for anyone listening. "Hello, Nova," Jade whispered, tears mixing with sweat, exhaustion turning into something else entirely. "Hello, my bright one." Troy stood back, giving them space, but his face had rearranged itself. Wonder looked different on him now, not the wonder of closing deals or seeing blueprints realized, but the wonder of watching biology turn into biography, cells becoming a person with preferences and protests. At 5:09 a.m., Omari followed. Calmer entrance, like he'd observed his sister's arrival and decided on a different approach. He came out looking around, eyes trying to focus, curious already about this loud, bright place he'd inherited. 2 cries now, stereo, a double announcement that the world had just become more complex and more complete simultaneously. Nadia worked quickly, checking vitals, clearing airways, the practiced dance of ensuring these new humans were equipped for their next breath and the 1,000 breaths after. "Dad," she said, looking at Troy, "you want to cut the cords?" Troy looked at Jade, asking permission for this role he hadn't earned yet, but was being offered anyway. Jade nodded, too tired for words, but her eyes said what her mouth couldn't. "Be careful, be present, be who they need." His hands shook, The good kind of shaking, the kind that comes from holding something precious and understanding its weight. 2 snips, 2 separations, 2 people becoming distinct from the body that had built them. He repeated their names like vows: Nova, Omari, Nova, Omari, learning them, letting them rearrange his internal landscape, understanding that he'd just become responsible for 2 people who would never care about mergers or optics, or how well he performed in rooms full of expectations. The next 72 hours moved in slow motion, wrapped in exhaustion. Jade slept in intervals, measured by feeding schedules. Troy learned swaddling from YouTube videos and Marisol's patient corrections. His architect, hands surprisingly good at the geometry of tucking tiny limbs into secured comfort. He counted ceiling tiles when he couldn't sleep, mapped the hospital floor layout, memorized which nurses were on which shifts. Anything to stay useful, to prove through small actions that he understood. This wasn't about grand gestures. It was about 3 a.m., diaper changes, and holding a baby upright for 20 minutes after feeding so they wouldn't spit up. His phone buzzed constantly. His mother, the board, Richard Stellan wanting to discuss Singapore timelines. He shut it off completely after sending one message to his assistant: family emergency. Clear my calendar. No narratives we don't write. Kiana noticed. Good call. These first days don't need an audience, they need attention. Troy kept a notebook, Dad Notes he called it, where he tracked patterns only visible. To someone paying attention, Nova fought sleep harder at 8 p.m. Omari. Spit up less if you waited 3 minutes after feeding before laying him down. Both of them calmed faster to Jade's humming than to any lullaby from a speaker. On day 3, before discharge, Jade asked Marisol to take the twins to the nursery for their final checkups. She needed to have a conversation without her heart being split between multiple needs. Troy sat in the chair he'd barely left, waiting. We co-parent, Jade said. No preamble, no hiding them, no showcasing them. They're not proof of anything except biology and timing. If we become more than CO parents, it's by choice, not convenience or guilt or nostalgia. Agreed. I mean it, Troy. No rooms that shrink them, no galas where they're accessories, no private life as public content. They get to be regular kids with regular problems, not billionaire heirs with trust funds and expectations. I understand. And us. She looked at him directly. There is no us right now. There's you and me and Nova and Omari, but not us. That's a different conversation that requires different proof. Troy nodded, his throat tight. I'll show you with days, not words or promises or performances. Just days where I show up right, where I choose them publicly and privately, where the only optic I care about is the one they see when they look at their father. They'll need your name on the birth certificates, whatever protects them, whatever you need. I need you to be consistent. Kids don't understand effort, they understand presence. So if you're in, you're all in. Not when it's convenient or when Singapore allows it, but daily. I'm in. He said it like a fact, not a promise. I can work from anywhere. I can restructure anything. These two, he gestured toward the nursery. They restructured me the second I heard them cry. Jade studied him, looking for performance, for the careful arrangement of truth he'd been so good at. She saw exhaustion, sincerity, fear wrapped in determination. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. Okay, she said finally. We'll figure out logistics, custody, visits, how this works with me in Savannah and you in Detroit. What if I moved to Savannah? Don't make that call in a hospital on 3 hours of sleep. Make it in 3 months, after you've lived the actual work, not the idea of it. Smart. She was always smarter than him about the things that mattered. Marisol returned with 2 wrapped bundles, each tiny face peaceful in sleep. Troy stood, took Omari from her arms, held him with the careful attention of someone, handling proof that miracles were just biology moving at the speed of purpose. Gentleness is a muscle, Jade said, watching him sway slightly, some instinct already teaching him the rhythm babies needed. Time to build it. Troy looked at her, at Nova in her arms, at Omari in his, at Marisol documenting the moment with her phone, not for social media, just for memory, for proof that this day happened and these people existed and love could take new shapes if you let it. I've built a lot of things, he said quietly. Skyscrapers, portfolios, reputations. But this, he looked down at Omari, who chose that moment to open his eyes, dark and unfocused, and completely trusting. This is the only thing I've ever built that might actually matter. Outside room 847, the sun rose over Savannah, light filtering through live oaks, Spanish moss. The fountain in Forsyth Park throwing water toward the sky with the reliable rhythm of things that know their purpose. Inside, 2 babies slept while 3 adults began the complicated work of building a family that didn't follow any blueprint, that couldn't be planned or projected or presented, only lived, one gentle day at a time. The cottage in Savannah developed a new rhythm in the weeks after the hospital, one measured in 3-hour feeding cycles, laundry. That never seemed finished, and the particular exhaustion that came from loving 2 people who couldn't yet say thank you. Troy rented an apartment 4 blocks away, close enough to arrive in minutes, far enough to respect the boundary Jade had drawn with careful precision. He came every morning at 6:30, brought groceries before she had to ask, learned that the sound machine worked, better on an ocean setting than rain, discovered that Nova preferred the left shoulder while Omari liked the right. He kept his notebook, Dad Notes, updating it after each shift, tracking the small details that would have seemed trivial in his former life but now constituted essential knowledge. Nova's particular cry that meant gas versus hunger, Omari's preference for being rocked horizontally rather than vertically, the exact angle at which both babies settled fastest after midnight feedings. Jade watched him learn, not perform learning, actually absorb information, adjust behavior, show up the next day having integrated yesterday's lessons. He washed bottles without being asked, kept the sink clear because he'd noticed clutter, stressed her, folded onesies in the specific way that made drawer organization possible. She found him asleep once on the nursery floor at 2 a.m., Nova and Omari in their bassinets. Above him, a tiny sock still clutched in his hand like evidence of a battle he'd won. She didn't wake him, just covered him with a blanket and understood that this exhaustion, in service of someone else's sleep, was a language she could trust. The first real test came in week 4, when both babies developed colic simultaneously. Evenings became marathons of walking, bouncing, trying every trick the internet suggested, and some Marisol remembered from raising 3 children of her own. Nothing worked consistently. The crying felt like it would never end, like it was the new permanent state of the universe. Troy showed up at 5 p.m. one Thursday, earlier than usual, carrying a bag. I researched colic, he said, unpacking white noise machines, different, bottle nipples, probiotic drops the pediatrician had mentioned, and I cleared my calendar through the weekend. You're going to sleep, actually sleep. I've got this. You can't. I can. Marisol will supervise so you don't worry, but you need rest. Your body is still recovering, and exhaustion makes everything harder. Jade wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a yawn that felt like it came from her bones. She looked at Marisol, who nodded encouragement. Let him try, her aunt said. You've been carrying this alone for 9 months already. Let someone else hold weight for a while. Jade slept for 6 hours straight, a luxury she'd forgotten existed. When she woke, the cottage was quiet. She found Troy in the living room, both babies asleep on his chest, positioned carefully so neither slid. Marisol sat in the corner, knitting, keeping watch. The probiotic drops helped, Marisol whispered, and he figured out they like being held facing out so they can see the room. Smart man, when he's paying attention. Troy's eyes opened at the sound of voices. They've been down for 40 minutes. I'm afraid to move. Don't, Jade said, settling into the chair across from him. You're their furniture now. They smiled at each other across the small space, across 2 sleeping babies. Across the bridge being built from wreckage and good intentions. 6 weeks in, his phone rang during a feeding. Detroit number. He silenced it, finished burping Nova, handed her back to Jade, then stepped onto the porch to return the call. Through the window, she watched his shoulders tense. watched him run his hand through hair that needed cutting, watched him end the call faster than the person on the other end probably wanted. He came back inside, quiet. "Press found out," he said simply. "They're asking questions. Someone saw me at the hospital and put pieces together. My orbit brings weather." Jade shifted Omari to her other side. "We set our forecast. Meaning you decide what kind of storm you are, whether you feed them or starve them, whether you make this about your image or their privacy." Troy nodded, already composing something in his head. "I'll handle it." The statement went out 3 hours later, one line through his personal attorney, not his PR team. "I'm a father to twins. My children and their mother deserve privacy. That's the only story that matters. No photos, no names, no confirmation of location or relationship status or future plans. Just a fact and a boundary, offered without apology or explanation." The Detroit Free Press tried for details. Forbes wanted an interview about balancing fatherhood and business. His mother called 6 times in one afternoon, each voicemail progressing from curious to concerned to controlling. He responded to none of them. Instead, he showed up at the cottage the next morning at 6:30, same as always, with the right kind of diapers and fresh coffee, and the understanding that consistency mattered more than commentary. By week 8, something shifted in how he worked. Jade noticed because she'd learned to read his particular weather too. The way his jaw set when dealing with board issues, how his typing speed increased when he was frustrated, the specific sigh that meant someone was asking him to choose performance over presence. He started restructuring the Keaton Foundation during nap times. Laptop balanced on his knees while Nova slept on his chest. She caught glimpses of the changes, unrestricted grants instead of project-specific funding, listening sessions, with community organizers instead of galas with donors, no naming rights required for contributions. Why the changes? She asked one afternoon while they folded laundry in the synchronized rhythm they'd developed, her sorting, him folding, both of them moving around each other like dancers who'd finally learned the choreography. "Because you were right," he said, creasing a onesie with unexpected precision. "Buildings can breathe if you let them. So can foundations. I was so focused on control and credit that I forgot the point was impact. That's good. It's late, but it's a start." He hired community members as board advisors, people who understood need from the inside, not from reports. He visited sites unannounced, not for photo opportunities, but to see where money was actually moving, where gaps still existed, where listening mattered more than solutions proposed by people who'd never lived the problem. Jade noticed the change by its quiet. No press releases, no rebranding campaign, no interviews about his personal transformation. Just different outcomes, different processes, different questions asked before checks were written. If you're feeling this chapter, understanding that real change doesn't to need a spotlight or a stage, comment lantern so I know you believe in the kind of growth that shows up in grocery runs and burp cloths, and restructured foundations that finally serve instead of showcase. Month 3 brought new complexities. Nova stopped sleeping unless someone was holding her. Omari developed a habit of spitting up precisely at the moment you thought he was settled. Troy's board demanded he return to Detroit for quarterly meetings. Eleanor Keaton threatened to visit Savannah to meet her grandchildren properly. Each challenge revealed something. Troy hired a local woman, Rebecca, to cover nights twice a week so Jade could sleep uninterrupted. He attended board meetings via video, professional from the waist up, wearing sweatpants stained with spit up below the camera line. He told his mother she could visit when invited, and not before, a boundary that cost him but protected what mattered more. "You're different," Jade said one night, both of them too tired to pretend conversations required energy. They sat on her porch steps while Rebecca handled the babies inside, the Savannah night warm and thick with the smell of jasmine. Different how? Quieter, not silent, purposeful. Like you finally figured out the difference between filling space and occupying it. Troy considered this. "I spent 3 years in therapy learning to ask what I was afraid of. Turns out most of my life was about avoiding that question. And now I'm afraid of the right things, Afraid I'll mess them up. Afraid I'll choose wrong when it matters. Afraid you'll never trust me with more than co-parenting. Jade didn't respond immediately. Trust wasn't a switch. It was a garden that required tending, seasons. Proof that things could grow in soil that had once seemed barren. Tests don't check if you can talk about change, she said finally, watching fireflies write light against the darkness. They check if you can stay through the parts that aren't beautiful. We're 3 months in. The real test is month 6, month 12, when novelty wears off, and this is just life. I'm not going anywhere. You said that before. Different context, same words. Troy nodded, accepting the weight of his own history. Then I'll show you. Not with words. With winter, spring, summer, however long it takes for you to see that I'm building for permanence now, not performance. Inside, Nova started crying, the specific cry that meant she was awake and offended about it. Omari joined seconds later, harmony of complaint. Troy stood first, offered Jade his hand to help her up. A small gesture. Routine, the kind of moment that didn't make stories but made lives. They went inside together, divided responsibilities without discussion, him taking Nova, her taking Omari, both of them moving through the routine that had become muscle memory. Change a diaper, check the temperature, offer comfort in the specific way each baby preferred. Through the window, the savannah night continued, live oaks holding their positions. Spanish moss swaying in breeze, the world moving at its own pace while, inside a cottage, 4 people built something that didn't have a name yet, but had a rhythm, a pattern, a foundation that might hold if they kept choosing it daily. Tests don't check if you can talk, they check if you can stay through. Teething and tantrums and board meetings that want you elsewhere. They check if your hands still show up when the work isn't Instagram-worthy. They check if your consistency can outlast everyone's doubt, including your own. Troy was learning to pass tests he'd once failed by never taking them. Jade was learning that protection and possibility could coexist. That boundaries weren't walls, they were maps, showing where safety lived. And somewhere between the 6-week checkup and the 3-month milestone, between bottles washed and laundry, folded and nights surviving together, they were building something neither had language for yet. Not romance, not just friendship, but the specific architecture of 2 people choosing to show up for 2 other people, and discovering that showing up a foundation sturdy enough to hold more than they'd planned. If it ever became more, if she ever let it, if he kept earning it, one quiet day at a time. The storm hit Savannah on a Thursday in June, the kind that rolled in from the Atlantic with intention and stayed until it made its point. Power went out at 7 p.m., right when Nova and Omari were hitting their fussiest hour, when exhaustion and hunger met the particular injustice of being 4 months old. Troy arrived as the first drops hit, already carrying supplies before Jade could test a need, battery-powered lanterns. Formula pre-measured into bottles, the brand of crackers she'd been craving but hadn't mentioned out loud. You didn't have to come in this, Jade said, taking the supplies while rain drummed the roof like percussion. Where else would I be? They built a blanket fort in the living room, his idea, executed with the same precision he brought to blueprints. Couch cushions became walls, sheets became ceiling. Lanterns cast gold light that turned ordinary space into sanctuary. Nova and Omari lay on a quilt in the center, watching shadows dance across the fabric sky. I built a treehouse once, Troy said, lying on his side next to the babies, close enough to touch but not crowded. When I was 7, crooked thing, held together with hope and stolen nails. My father tore it down after 3 days. Liability, he said, but really, he couldn't stand that I'd built something without permission, something that was mine before it was presentable. Jade lay on the other side of the twins, mirroring his position. Is that why you build perfect things now? Built, past tense. I'm learning to build different things, blanket forts, co-parenting schedules, foundations that serve instead of showcase. He reached across, adjusted Omari's blanket. Things that don't need to be perfect to matter. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the fort held steady. Jade's head found his shoulder without planning. Not romance, just exhaustion meeting available. Comfort. The specific intimacy of two people too tired to maintain unnecessary distance. "This feels safe," she said quietly. "Safe or saved?" He asked it gently, needing to know if she was talking about the storm or something older. "Safe. There's a difference. Saved implies rescue. Safe implies partnership." Troy nodded against her hair, understanding that this distinction mattered, that she was teaching him vocabulary he'd never learned in business school, the language of showing up without savior narratives, of being present without being central. They fell asleep like that, a blanket fort holding 4 humans through thunder and rain and power outages, the twins between them like tiny bridges, connecting separate countries, learning to share a border. The real test came at 3 a.m., when Jade woke to her phone alarm. The backup she'd set knowing feeding times didn't pause for weather. She reached for Nova, found Troy already sitting up, already checking Omari's diaper with the penlight he'd thought to bring. "I've got him," Troy whispered. "You take her. We'll tag team." They moved through the dark cottage like choreography, each knowing where bottles were, where burp cloths lived, the specific angle each baby preferred for feeding. The power was still out, so they worked by lantern light and muscle. Memory. 2 people who'd logged enough hours to operate on instinct. When both twins were fed, changed, and settled back toward sleep, Troy didn't return to the fort. He stayed in the nursery rocker, Omari on his chest, writing in his dad notes by phone light. 3:17 a.m. Omari likes the football hold better during overnight feeds. Less gas after. Nova fought sleep until Jay hummed that melody from her grandmother. The storm is still going. Power still out. Everyone is still safe. This is enough. This is everything. Jade found the notes later, read them while he slept in the rocker, learned that his tenderness had a written record, that he was documenting not for performance but for practice, for proof to himself that he could learn, could adjust, could become. The sink was clean when she checked. He'd washed bottles one-handed, Omari still sleeping against him, because he'd noticed the mess stressed her, and stress affected milk supply, and milk supply affected the babies. He was learning systems thinking applied to love, how one choice affected 3 others, how his actions rippled. By dawn, the power returned. The storm moved on. The fort came down, returned to being ordinary furniture. But something had shifted in the foundation under the foundation, in the space where trust was building its case 1:03 a.m., feeding at a time. 2 weeks later, the foundation launch event loomed, a public unveiling of the restructured grants, program, community advisory boards, the new model Troy had spent 3 months building. His board of directors saw opportunity in optics. Daniel called from Singapore. "They're suggesting you bring a date." Eleanor specifically mentioned it would show balance, humanize the brand, and warm up the press coverage. Troy sat on Jade's porch, watching her paint while the twins napped inside, Rebecca on duty. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should make your own choice, then live with it honestly." That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. He found Jade later, after Daniel had called back twice and his mother had sent a text with 3 suggested appropriate companions from suitable families. "The foundation event is Saturday," he said. "No preamble. The board thinks I should bring someone." They mentioned you specifically, not by name, but the implication was clear. Humanizing warmth, they called it. Jade's brush paused mid-stroke. "And you're asking me because I'm trying to do this differently. Not assuming, not orchestrating, not using you to improve my presentation. Actually asking what you'd want, if anything. What do you want?" Troy sat down, paint-flecked drop cloth under him. "I want you there. Not as optics, but because you're the reason the restructure happened. Your questions, your clarity about foundations versus feelings, that's what made me see the model was broken. But I won't ask you to be displayed, won't put you in another room that might shrink you for someone else's comfort." Jade studied him, looking for performance, for the careful arrangement of sincerity he'd once mastered. She saw exhaustion, honesty, a man still learning to untangle motive from action. "What happens if I say no? I go alone." Say what needs to be said. Leave early for 10 p.m. Feeding. And, if I say yes, same answer. Because you're not there to complete my image. You're there if you want to be, on your terms. With the understanding that I'm leaving at 9:30 regardless of who's still talking. She smiled then, small but real. Go alone. You sure? I'm sure I need to see you choose truth over optics when optics are available and easier. This is your test, not ours. Troy nodded, understanding he'd just been handed an opportunity for proof. Saturday arrived with Georgia heat and higher stakes. The event was downtown Savannah at the cultural center Jade had once told him needed funding, but would never get it because the neighborhood didn't photograph well for donor reports. He'd given them the first grant under the new model. The room was filled with press, board members, community organizers who'd been invited to speak instead of just receive. Eleanor Keaton attended, wearing criticism in pearls, disappointed he'd arrived alone. At the podium, Troy could feel old muscle memory activating. The performance, instinct, the careful calibration of words to maximum effect. He breathed through it and found different ground. The Keaton Foundation is changing, he began. No notes, no script. For too long, we measured impact by visibility, plaques with our name, ribbon cuttings we controlled, press releases celebrating our generosity while communities did the actual work. The room quieted. This wasn't the speech they'd expected. Going forward, there are no naming rights required, no board approval of how money gets spent. That's up to the people living the work. No photo opportunities we orchestrate, just resources and respect, given to people who were solving problems before we showed up and will continue after we leave. His mother's face went tight. Richard Stellan, attending from Detroit, looked confused. But the community organizers in the front row, the ones who'd been advising the restructure, they nodded. They understood. I'm a father now, Troy continued, departing from anything planned. My kids are 4 months old. They're teaching me daily that control is a myth, that presence matters more than perfection, that you can't manage love. You can only show up for it. I'm applying those lessons here. This foundation doesn't exist to make me look good. It exists to move resources toward need, then get out of the way. He finished at 9:15, took 3 questions, and declined the after-party invitation. His mother cornered him at the exit. You embarrassed the family name. I honored it by actually helping instead of performing help. And the woman? The twins? You're really choosing that life. I'm choosing to be their father. Everything else is detailed. He drove back to Jade's cottage, arriving at 9:47, 13 minutes before the scheduled feeding. She was waiting on the porch, twins already awake and starting their pre-feeding complaints. How'd it go? She asked, handing him Nova. I'll mess up, he said, taking his daughter, settling into the rhythm they'd built. I'll choose wrong sometimes, slip back into old patterns, disappoint people whose approval I'm still learning to live without. We both will. The difference is what we do next. Whether we adjust or defend, they fed the twins in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. That was its own communication. Through the window, Savannah night continued. Fireflies, jasmine, the reliable fountain. Throwing water toward the sky because that was its nature, not its performance. Daniel said the speech went viral, Troy mentioned, burping Omari with practiced ease. Not the good kind of viral the board wanted. What kind? The honest kind. Community organizers sharing it. People asking why other foundations don't operate the same way. My mother called it unnecessarily transparent. Jade smiled. And you? I call it Wednesday. Just what needed saying, said plainly. Then coming home for what actually matters. Not fireworks, just steady light. But steady light can lead you home if you let it, if you follow its quiet glow instead of searching for a spotlight. Troy was learning to trust the smaller illumination, the one that didn't impress strangers, but guided the people who needed finding. And Jade was learning that tests passed in private mattered more than speeches applauded in public. That the man who showed up at 9:47 for feeding schedules was building something. more reliable than the one who'd once asked her to wait in lounges for better optics. The test wasn't whether he could talk about change. It was whether his hands could hold babies and boundaries simultaneously, whether his calendar could flex for fever or fussiness, whether his choices could survive the pressure to perform. So far, he was passing. So far, the light stayed steady. Love didn't return with declarations or grand gestures. It returned on a Tuesday in August while Jade made stew and Troy folded laundry, the twins playing. On a mat between them, discovering their hands like they were miracles worth repeated investigation. Rain tapped the windows. Georgia afternoon rain, purposeful but not aggressive. Troy told a story about his grandmother's wooden spoon, how she'd used it to teach him to cook and to discipline in equal measure, how he'd inherited it but never knew how to honor it until now, standing in someone's kitchen, being useful, letting domesticity be its own dignity. Jade laughed, unguarded, and the sound made him look up from the onesie he was folding. Their eyes met across ordinary space doing ordinary things, and something shifted, not new but finally acknowledged. The foundation they'd been building in 3 a.m., feedings and grocery runs and therapy breakthroughs, had become solid enough to hold weight. She kissed him first. Stew simmering, babies babbling, laundry half folded. Her lips tasted like the coffee she'd had an hour ago, like the chapstick she always kept in her right pocket, like trust that had been tested enough to try. He kissed back carefully, his hands finding her waist but not pulling, letting her control depth and duration and meaning. When they pulled apart, both said the same word simultaneously, slow, then laughed, then kissed again, then returned to stew and laundry because babies didn't pause for romantic milestones. And that was exactly right. Love fitting into life, instead of demanding life rearrange for love. Co-parenting continued its rhythm, but now small additions appeared in the spaces between routines. His hand finding hers during late-night feedings, her head on his shoulder during the twins' afternoon nap. Conversations that stretched past logistics into futures that included plural pronouns. 1 week later, Troy arrived with paperwork that wasn't about custody or legal protection, but about partnership. The twins' trust folder, he said, spreading documents on Jade's kitchen table, while Nova gummed his watch and Omari practiced grabbing his own feet. I'm naming you an equal co-trustee, not because it's required or expected, but because any decision about their future should be ours, not mine with your input. Jade read through the documents carefully. He'd included education provisions that valued trade schools equally with universities, travel funds for cultural education, seed money for whatever passion they developed, art, science, business, community organizing. No predetermined path, just resources and respect for whoever they became. The sleeve, not the thumb, she said quietly. What? You're holding the paper by the sleeve, the edge, not the thumb, not controlling. You're offering, not dictating. Troy looked at his hands, surprised to be seen so specifically. I'm learning, slowly. But yeah, I'm trying to hold things differently now. She signed as CEO trustee. Equal signatures, equal authority, equal responsibility for two people who would inherit wealth but hopefully learn worth first. The blessing happened under the live oaks in Forsyth Park, where Spanish moss hung like benediction, and the fountain threw water toward the sky with its reliable rhythm. No cameras, no press, no performance. Just Marisol, Rebecca, Dr. Vega, who'd become friend beyond therapist, and Daniel, who'd flown in from Singapore, where he was thriving. Not a wedding, a commitment ceremony that honored what they were building without rushing the architecture. Troy wore linen, wrinkled from humidity. Jade wore yellow, bright and clean, a dress she'd owned for years. The twins wore onesies that said, "Love is patient and love is kind," Marisol's idea, executed perfectly. They spoke vows they'd written separately, discovered they'd said similar things in different vocabularies. "I choose to show up daily," Troy said, holding Nova while Jade held Omari. "To build with you, not for you. To listen before solving. To honor your boundaries as the maps that keep us safe. I choose to trust your growth," Jade responded. "To believe that change sustained is change real." to build a gentle world with you where our kids learn that love is action, not performance. Marisol blessed them with words her grandmother had spoken, lineage of women calling down grace. Dr. Vega spoke about the work it took to get here, the therapy hours, and hard conversations and willingness to choose discomfort over ease. Daniel reminded them that love was both decision and practice, both commitment and daily maintenance. The twins slept through their parents' promises, which felt exactly right. This wasn't about them witnessing, it was about them inheriting a foundation built sturdy enough to hold their futures. The knock came 3 days later, not on the door, in Troy's email. A tabloid reporter with photos from the park, questions about secret ceremony, and a sugar-coated threat disguised. As opportunity, give us the exclusive, control the narrative, or we publish what we have with speculation. Troy showed Jade the email, hands steady. Your call. It's your privacy too. She read it twice. What do you want to do? I want to let it die from lack of fuel. But I'll follow your lead. They called his attorney together, speakerphone on the kitchen table while the twins had tummy time. The response was brief, professional, and final. Mr. Keaton and Miss Collins value their privacy. No comment, no exclusive, no story. Publish speculation at your legal risk. The story appeared anyway, a small item, few photos, mostly questions. It generated minor buzz for 48 hours, then died because they didn't feed it, didn't confirm or deny, didn't make themselves available for the narrative others wanted to write. Silence starved the fire. Within a week, other news replaced them. Their story returned to being theirs, private, ordinary, exactly as valuable as any other family's and no more. 6 months after the hospital, they sat on Jade's porch with 2 cakes. One from the bakery downtown, perfect, professional, Instagram ready. One Troy had made himself, lopsided, frosting applied with more enthusiasm than skill. Happy half-birthday Nova and Omari, spelled out in crooked letters. What do you think about the gala? Jade asked, eating the lopsided cake because it tasted better, because effort seasoned sweetness differently than expertise. Every day, Troy admitted, every single day, I think about the room that shrank you, the choice I made, the woman I lost because I was too afraid to choose her loudly. And now I'm grateful to that scared man, because his failure taught me what mattered. His loss sent me to therapy. His loneliness made space for actual growth instead of performing change. Jade leaned against him, watching fireflies write light against the savannah dusk. I'm proud of the girl who left. I'm proud of the man who asked for truth, even when it cost him comfort. The twins were asleep inside, Rebecca reading in the corner, giving the parents space. In 6 months, Nova and Omari had grown from helpless to beginning agency, reaching for what they wanted, protesting what they didn't, learning that their voices mattered and needs got met consistently. Their parents were learning similar lessons, just decades delayed. Troy set down his cake, turned to face Jade fully. I want to ask you something, and I need you to know it's not about headlines, or completion, or proving anything to anyone outside this porch. Hey, will you let me be your partner? Not just the twins' co-parent, not just the man who shows up for feedings and foundation work, but your actual partner in building whatever life we're creating. I thought that's what we've been doing. We have. I just wanted to ask it clearly, out loud, so you know it's a choice I'm making consciously, and you can choose consciously back. Jade took his hands, paint-stained despite the hour, despite having not worked. On canvas that day, some marks became permanent, some beauty didn't wash away. I don't need promises about forever, she said carefully. I need practice, daily choosing. So yes, let's be partners. Let's choose each other today, and then wake up tomorrow and choose again. Let's build something that's strong because we want it, not because we announced it perfectly. Troy kissed her then, cake sweet, twilight soft, the kind of kiss that wasn't about passion but about peace, about finally arriving somewhere safe enough to rest. Not fireworks, he said against her lips. Steady light, she finished. Strong enough to see the next step. That's enough. Inside, Nova started fussing. the specific cry that meant she was awake and had opinions about it. Omari joined seconds later, harmony of complaint. Their parents smiled, kissed once more, then went inside to handle the beautiful, exhausting, ordinary work of showing up for people who needed them. Some stories explode across headlines, burn bright, then vanish into ash and aftermath. This one learned to be steady light, quiet, reliable, throwing enough illumination for the next step and the step after that. She refused to be small to make anyone comfortable. He refused to be a brand instead of a human. 2 tiny heartbeats taught 2 grown hearts how to keep time, how to find rhythm in the ordinary, how to build foundations that could hold feelings without crushing them. Love didn't return with grand gestures. It returned in wooden spoon stories and lopsided cakes, in trust documents that honored partnership, in the choice to let tabloids starve from lack of fuel. It returned when it was safe to, when the room was big enough for everyone to breathe, when both people had done enough work to deserve each other's tenderness. And it stayed because they chose it daily, not once in a ceremony but repeatedly in laundry rooms and kitchens and 3 a.m. feedings in the unglamorous architecture of building a life that valued worth over optics, presence over performance, and dignity over any stories someone else wanted to write about them. 2 years later, Troy Keaton stood in Jade's studio, now their studio, watching her teach a class of teenagers how to see negative space. Nova and Omari played in the corner, building block towers and knocking them down, learning about creation and destruction in equal measure. The mural from Detroit had been recreated here in Savannah, in the community center where Jade taught twice a week. The same golden edges, the same handprints, but new names written in chalk below, including 2 small prints that said Nova and Omari in wobbly toddler letters. His phone buzzed. The board, wanting to discuss expansion plans. He silenced it. There would be time for that later, during nap time, during the hours he carved out for work that didn't interfere with work that mattered more. Jade caught his eye across the room, smiled, returned to teaching a young woman how to trust her hands more than her eyes. Troy pulled out his dad notes, now on volume 3, and wrote, 2:47 p.m. Nova built a tower 8 blocks high before Omari knocked it down. She rebuilt it. He knocked it down again. She rebuilt it again. When asked why, she said, because it's fun to build. Learning from a 2-year-old, the point isn't the tower. It's the building. He looked up, watched his family exist in ordinary afternoon light, and understood finally what Jade had been trying to teach him from that first day on the ladder. Some things you build to last. Some things you build because the building itself is the point. And the best things you build them slowly, with attention, with willingness to start over when necessary, with understanding that foundations matter more than facades. Love had returned when it was safe, and it stayed because every day they made it safe again. If this story lit something in you, showing you that real love is built in ordinary moments, with extraordinary consistency, tap like and subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories. Share it with one person who believes dignity is love's backbone, who understands that boundaries are maps to safety, not walls keeping people out. Choose each other in the comments and tell me, which moment changed Troy the most? Was it the gala failure, the 2:17 a.m. call, the hospital arrival, or the 3 a.m. feedings that taught him presence matters more than performance? I want to hear which scene made you believe in second chances earned through daily choosing. Your comments fuel these stories, so let's talk about love that doesn't perform. It just shows up, steady and true, bright enough for the next step,